read something in a book recently, fascinated me, and it was a story about the Moths of Manchester. I never heard of the Moths of Manchester, perhaps you haven't either, so allow me to enlighten you. Darwin, of course, is famous for his theory of evolution, that the strong survive and any given species will adapt to its environment over millennia. But the Moths of Manchester broke the mould back in the 1800s. The Moths of Manchester changed from the peppered moth, which was a white-winged moth with dappled grey and black spots to allow camouflage against a tree bark. As the Industrial Revolution caught on and cities like Manchester in England were billowing out smoke from their smokestacks, particles of soot began to descend everywhere, including on the tree barks. And what happened? The moths all of a sudden were camouflaged against a light-coloured bark. As the bark got darker, well, then the moths became less camouflaged and were picked off by ravenous birds, right? So what did the moths do? They sort of said, okay lads, something's got to change here. And they began to change as a species around Manchester. They didn't change in other parts of England. They changed around Manchester, right? And they began to get darker and darker and darker. And by 1898, 98% of the peppered moth around Manchester was in fact black-winged. Incredible. So that it could hide against the tree bark. And then as the Industrial Revolution waned and the soot began to disappear and the tree bark began to lighten again, what did the moths do? Another 100 years they changed back, right? Now 100 years at one level is a long time, another level it's nothing in the scheme of things, right? In Darwinian terms it's nothing, right? What it does show is that if a species wants to survive and thrive, it can adapt and it can change, relatively speaking, quickly. And what's that got to do with you and me? Well, what it's got to do with you and me is that you and me can also change as quickly as we choose to. We can change as quickly as we choose to. We can become the person that we always dreamed of becoming. We can live the life that we always dreamed of living if we're willing to change. If it's not working for you, it's not working for me today, well then it's up to us to change. Wonderful thing is we can. Wonderful thing is it doesn't have to take 100 years. You and I probably don't have 100 years, right? It doesn't have to take 100 years. It can happen in a relatively short space of time so long as you and I are willing to make the changes necessary. And I think that's wonderful news. If the peppered moth can make those sweeping changes back in the 1800s, well then what can you and I do at the beginning of the 21st century as we enter the soaring 20s? We can absolutely radically change our futures if we decide that that's what we want to do and if we're willing to go through the changes necessary. As somebody once said, for things to change, things must change. And the only question really is, are you going to change? Are you going to make the changes required to live the life that you've always wanted to live? You look at anybody today that you deem to be successful in your terms, whatever those terms are for you, somebody who's living the life that you envy. Well, you know, were they born that way? Probably not in most cases. Probably they had to step out and become the first black moth, for want of a term, in their families, in their lineage. And perhaps you and I need to be the same. But you see, the wonderful thing is, if we step out and become the black moths in our family line, in our lineage, well then what impact is that going to have on our children and our grandchildren? And I'd suggest it's going to have a massive impact. What life do you want to lead? What legacy do you want to leave? Because if the life you want to lead and the legacy you want to leave are different to the track you're currently on, well then please, my friend, make the change. Please become, if you have to be, the first black-winged moth, relatively speaking, in your family line. Because not only will you impact your life and the lives of those around you, but you'll impact all future generations too. And of course, as ever, I wish you well. And thank you for joining me for this week's Coffee with Colin. I hope and trust as ever you got something from it. Please, very importantly, consider what's been shared here today and apply it into your thinking for this next week. And then equally as importantly, come back next week and we'll share another coffee together and I'll ruminate on some other aspect of life and business. Between now and then, get some great coffee, get some fresh air. If you spend too much time alone, I recommend you go meet some people. And conversely, if you spend too much time with people, I recommend you take a little time alone. And then when the time is right, and only when the time is right, get your head back in the game, get organised for the week ahead, get stuck in, make some changes. I'll see you here this time next week for another Coffee with Colin. Let's launch it. I love great coffee. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.